This strip of water, 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, through it flows roughly 20% of all the oil traded on planet Earth, 20 million barrels every single day. And right now, it's closed. Because on February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched airstrikes on Iran and killed its supreme leader. What happened next triggered the worst energy crisis since the 1970s. And today, we explore why that is. Before we get into the war, you need to understand why this piece of water matters more than almost any other place on Earth right now. The Strait of Hormuz is basically the exit ramp of the Persian Gulf. On the north side, Iran, on the south, Oman, and in between, a shipping lane only about 3 kilometers wide in each direction. Through that tiny corridor passes oil from Saudi Arabia, from Iraq, from the UAE, from Kuwait, from Qatar's massive liquefied natural gas export terminals. According to the Congressional Research Service, before this war, the strait handled about 20% of the world's seaborne oil trade and 20% of its LNG, that is, liquefied natural gas. Qatar, the little country that heats homes across Europe, its gas travels through this strait. Japan, South Korea, India, all of them depend on oil that comes through Hormuz. Roughly 3,000 ships passed through this strait every month before February 28. Today, that number sits at around 5% of that. The strait is not just closed, it is a weapon. February 28, 2026. Before dawn, the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes across Iran. The targets: military installations, nuclear facilities, and the regime's leadership. And in those first hours, Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was killed. Within hours, Iran's military responded. Hundreds of missiles, thousands of drones fired at US embassies, military bases, and Gulf oil infrastructure. And then the move that shook the world. Iran's Revolutionary Guard announced the Strait of Hormuz was closed. Iranian gunboats boarded vessels. Mines were laid in the shipping lanes. Ships were attacked. 5 crew members were killed in the first week alone. According to the UK House of Commons library briefing on this crisis, shipping companies began suspending operations in the strait almost immediately. That was when a regional war became a global economic crisis. Before the war, oil was trading at around $70 a barrel. By mid-March 2026, Brent crude had surged past $120. In Europe, the crisis hit even harder. European gas storage was already dangerously low after a brutal winter, when Qatar declared force majeure, essentially saying we can't deliver what we have promised. Dutch gas benchmark prices nearly doubled. The economic forecasting firm Vital estimated 1 billion barrels of oil production would ultimately be lost because of this war. And here's the part that almost never makes the news in the West. Gulf Arab states, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, get more than 80% of their food through that same strait. And by mid-March, 70% of the region's food imports were also disrupted. Retailers began airlifting rice, flour, and cooking oil. Consumer prices spiked by up to 120%. Iran had also struck desalination plants in Kuwait and Qatar, the source of 99% of those countries' drinking water. A maritime blockade had become a humanitarian crisis. Now here's where it goes even more complicated. Because the United States didn't just fight Iran, it then picked a fight with the strait itself. On April 13, 2026, weeks into the war, the US Navy launched what it called a counter-blockade. Not of the strait itself, but of all ships traveling to or from Iranian ports. Over 10,000 US troops, more than a dozen Navy ships, fighter jets stationed over the Gulf of Oman. Trump said the blockade was costing Iran $500 million per day. The first seizure came on April 19. Marines from the 31st Expeditionary Unit boarded an Iranian-flagged vessel called Tosca. Iran's response was to close that strait again. Both sides were now blockading each other. Think about what that means for the rest of the world. Two powers fighting over who controls the exit ramp of the world's largest oil reservoir. Neither willing to blink, both with something to lose. There was a ceasefire, sort of. On April 8th, the US and Iran agreed to a temporary 2-week truce, brokered quietly with the help of China. Iran's supreme leader approved it, but the strait never fully reopened. Shipping numbers barely moved. The highest level direct US-Iran talks since 1979 Iranian Revolution took place in Islamabad on April 11th and 12th. J.D. Vance sat across from Iran's parliament speaker. Those talks collapsed. After they failed, Trump said, and I quote, that he no longer cared about negotiations. He then ordered the US Navy to blockade the entire strait, stopping, in his words, any and all ships trying to enter or leave. Then, on May 4th, Trump announced Operation Project Freedom, a US Navy escort mission to get merchant ships through. On May 6th, he paused it, citing great progress in talks. The strait was supposed to be reopened, still has traffic at about 5% of normal levels. Here's the brutal arithmetic of who benefits from a closed Hormuz. Russia. Every day that Gulf oil can't reach global markets, Russian oil, which trades at a discount, becomes more valuable. Russia saw an average increase of roughly $150 million per day in oil revenue in March alone. China called the US blockade, and I quote, dangerous and irresponsible act. Beijing has continued buying Iranian oil, roughly 1.4 million barrels a day, paying in Chinese yuan through Iran's own shipping channels. Iran literally set up an alternative shipping lane north of Larak Island and charged $2 million a vessel to pass through it. India, which relies heavily on Gulf oil, got an emergency 30-day waiver from the US Treasury in March, allowing it to buy stranded Russian oil cargoes just to keep its fuel supply from collapsing for the time being. Britain and France have been trying to organize a multinational convoy mission to reopen Hormuz. They explicitly refused to join Trump's blockade. The EU and UK all said they would not support the plan. The World Economic Forum's analysis summed it up bluntly. Maritime pressure is no longer just accompanying diplomacy, it is the diplomacy. Europe is in a particularly dangerous spot. Lufthansa cut flights. Chemical manufacturers in Germany imposed 30% surcharges because energy costs collapsed their margins. UK inflation is forecast to breach 5% this year. The IMF cut its global growth forecast to 3.1% for 2026, specifically citing this crisis. Eurasia Group's Ian Bremmer, whose firm tracks global political risk, put it plainly earlier this year. 2026 is shaping up to be a tipping point for the world order, one where the US itself has become the single biggest driver of global risk. Here's what I want to argue. The Strait of Hormuz has been a flashpoint for decades. The US has fought to keep it open since the 1980s. The tanker war with Iran in 1987 and 1988. Every president since then understood that strait stays open or the global economy breaks. What's different about 2026 is that the United States itself is now using the strait as a weapon. Washington is not the neutral protector of global shipping anymore. It's party to the blockade, and the world has noticed. Countries are doing bilateral deals with whoever will sell them oil. The old multilateral system where America guaranteed open seas is being stress tested harder than any point since World War II. George Brew, writing in Foreign Affairs through the Eurasia Group, made an argument that will stick with me. He said, Iran's real weapon isn't oil. It's its ability to disrupt shipping and energy flows, and that ability control over Hormuz may prove more durable than any past shock. Because even if the current standoff eases, the risk of future blockades will permanently change how every government and company thinks about energy. The world built its energy system around this assumption that 3,000 ships a month would always pass through that narrow blue strip between Iran and Oman. That assumption is broken now. And figuring out what replaces it, that's the real project of the next decade.